Welcome to this week's edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Clayman. I have a very special guest, Ken Timmerman, a longtime friend and colleague. He's got an interesting history. I'll let him tell you initially how he was a hostage at one time himself with regard to terrorists. He is the senior fellow of the American First Policy Institute and just wrote a new book. He's a great author. Kenneth R. Timmerman, The Iran House, Tales of Revolution, Persecution, War, and Intrigue. What could be more interesting than all of that? Ken, welcome to Special Prosecutor with Larry Clayman. Just give a brief history of who you are. And I always find it interesting when you tell the story about how you were a hostage at one time in the Middle East.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's great to see you again, Larry. Happy New Year. We've known each other for, I don't know how many years now, probably 30 years if it's a day. Back when you had founded Judicial Watch. And
That's right.
we were just talking off air about Bill Hennessy, the famous sketch artist at the federal courts in Washington, D.C. And he had sketched the two of us together in a court case that you were prosecuting against the Iranian regime for terrorism and for human rights violation against a Iranian dissident, Akbar Mohammadi. So you were representing his brother and sister. So that was really a treat to see that recently. Yeah, my latest book, The Iran House, it kind of tells a lot of stories about the Iranian regime. It tells stories about my working with the FBI. They came to me, to my house. They knocked on my door, Larry, and they didn't knock on my door saying, hey, you were in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. Couldn't have been there because my wife was getting her hip replaced on January 6th.
Otherwise, you might have been.
Yeah. So I've got an ironclad alibi. And they all know. Well, this was before. This was during Trump won. This was right after Trump took power, came to the White House in 2017. And they basically came to me to help them run agents against the Iranian regime because they did not have any. And neither the CIA nor the FBI or the U.S. intelligence community writ large, they did not have human sources in Tehran, and I did. And the reason I did was because I'd been working for years and years. By the way, it's the same reason I was with you in that courtroom as an expert witness.
Right.
I've been working for years and years with Iranian dissidents, and many of these dissidents came out from the intelligence community in Iran, either the Revolutionary Guards or the Ministry of Intelligence, Information and Security, or the Supreme Leader's Intelligence Office. And all of them have family members, friends, colleagues, former colleagues, people. They've got their own networks back in Iran, and they talk to them every single day. And our intelligence community doesn't talk to them. So they had to come to a guy like me yeah, I know a guy. So I always knew a guy who knew a guy, and we wound up with real information. And you'll find out in the book, one of the big stories there led to the killing of Qasem Soleimani, Iran's top terrorist. And I had learned through my sources that he was organizing an attack on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad over the New Year's holiday 2019-2020. And the actual attack was going to take place about January 10th of 2020. And so I was feeding this into my handlers. They were feeding it into the president's daily brief. It was going to the White House. And ultimately, the president decided that Qasem Soleimani was the guy, because that's what the intelligence showed. He was the guy organizing the attack on the U.S. Embassy, and he decided to take him out. And I think it was a tremendously bold and courageous decision. I think it was an important thing to do because, as I counseled him, I said, look, you can't, when the Iranians hit you, you can't just sit back. You can't let them hit you again and hit you again, because they'll hit you harder. You have to hit them so hard that they don't even want to think about hitting you again. And that's what he did with Qasem Soleimani. It's what Reagan did in 1988 with Operation Praying Mantis, right? When he sunk 2/3 of the Iranian Navy in a single day. They stopped messing around with us for quite some time. Anyhow, that's not the
He did the same thing with Muhammad Gaddafi, when he bombed his palace and killed one of his kids at that point in time. That kind of shut up Gaddafi at the time. But this is kind of the segue because, of course, we've had this terrorist attack in New Orleans. We don't fully know what happened with regard to the Trump Tower in Las Vegas, Nevada, where I've stayed in the past. And this, in my view, as you've written just today or yesterday, I read your article, we agree on this. This is the result of our FBI devoting huge amounts of resources to persecuting and prosecuting and having indicted and tried and convicted peaceful January 6th protesters, some of whom I represent. So we threw all of our resource there. We looked away from this terrorism. Biden has said in the past, and so has the administration, that the biggest threat is white supremacy.
White supremacy.
I would say we're probably going to see, and you and I may differ to agree on this. We talked about it on January 6th when Trump is, in fact, sworn in. I think you're going to see black supremacy, terrorist supremacy in the streets with Black Lives Matter and such. Maybe not the Democrat Party. They may be smart enough to not have their fingerprints on it. But it's not even that. I mean, we're talking about radical Islamic terrorism that has now infiltrated our country. So tell us more about your article. I have podcasts that say the same thing.
Right. Well, I think it's pretty clear at this point what motivated this individual in New Orleans, and he posted these videos. He pledged bayat. He pledged allegiance to ISIS online. The FBI completely missed this because, again, they were distracted. They were the FBI these days does two things. They stopped working with me, by the way, on the Iran target, because once Biden came in, we don't care about Iran. They're a friend. The Iranian regime was a friend to the Biden regime. So they no longer wanted to pursue targets, that were working against the Iranian regime. But instead, you mentioned January 6th. They went after the January 6th people, but they also had a whole legion of people, not just at FBI headquarters, but in every bureau around the country, every field office in the country dedicated to DEI. And I saw a post recently that you have a whole bunch of people at headquarters who are in the DEI branch of the FBI. They said, we're going to resign en masse if Kash Patel is actually confirmed by the Senate. And I said, wow, make my day. I hope you all walk out arm in arm so the American people can see how many FBI people, employees of the FBI, are dedicated to DEI instead of law enforcement.
Well,
So
yeah, DEI is essentially affirmative action. That's what we're talking about. And we saw it at the press conference right after the attack in New Orleans. They brought this young African American woman out who didn't have a clue what she was saying. The mayor said it was terrorism. The police chief said it was terrorism, and she said, "Oh, there's no terrorism here." Right? I mean, it was shocking, really. I mean, she was basically a desk clerk that they brought her out on that.
I don't know who she was. She was well spoken. Let me say that. She was quite attractive. She was well spoken, and she was a complete idiot. And she said, as you mentioned, she said that we know that it's not terrorism. And the FBI realized pretty quickly they had to parachute in the deputy director or the director of their counterterrorism bureau from Washington, right? A deputy, an associate deputy director or whatever it is of the FBI, one of the muckety mucks. They had to parachute that guy down to New Orleans.
I might say there are a lot of really intelligent African Americans. Okay, but they didn't pick them. Okay, they picked them, the ones that they wanted for political purposes in the Biden administration. But in fact, the white guy they bring down from Washington, he wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer either. I'm watching him do his press conference. He's reading his notes. He can't even read them correctly.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
why isn't the director of the FBI under this circumstance down there himself? What is he doing?
So
Why didn't he come down?
Yeah, so DEI has infected the entire bureau, I think, from top to bottom. The rot, the political rot, has gone, it's deep in the bureau, and it starts with Christopher Wray. It starts with Christopher Wray, and he is. I think everybody understands that he has not been a great leader. I know an awful lot of field agents at the bureau, and early on, I asked him kind of quietly, what do you think of Christopher Wray? He said, well, you know where he came from, don't you? I said, no. He said he came out of King and Spalding. I said,
In
oh,
Atlanta.
King and Spalding. Oh, you mean the mob lawyers in Atlanta? Oh, I'm sorry, I don't. The alleged mob lawyers in Atlanta. King and Spalding is a very well-known law firm in Atlanta to have represented in the past drug dealers in
Well, not
legal.
just that. Not just I went to a law school at Emory University, so I
Yeah,
know very
you
well, and
know.
I know my colleagues applied to King and Spalding,
Right,
and
right.
so did I.
Yes.
And in those days, if you were a Jew, there was no chance you were getting into King and Spalding. I mean, it was an
Yeah.
elitist organization, and that for matter even whether you're a Christian, okay, you had to become from the blue bloods to get in
Right.
there. It's always been a very elitist place that was extremely aloof.
Yeah.
But it didn't bother me.
But so in this, so that's where he came from. So Christopher Wray, did not come out of the FBI. He was a lawyer, and he was plucked by well, Trump brought him in, but I'm not sure who it is that advised Trump to bring him in. That part of the story I don't know, so I can't speculate on that. But Trump brought him in thinking that he would be the best person, and he turned out to be a disaster.
Well, this raises a lot of other issues too, and it's something I've been talking about, is that President Trump was well intentioned in his first term. And whether he was appointing people like Christopher Wray, names were given to him by Republican rhino lobbyists making a lot of money, to put names forward. Wray was a pretty uncontroversial person. He had been, lower level Justice Department private lawyer in Atlanta, didn't ruffle feathers, good yes man, did whatever people told him to do, dotted his I's, crossed his T's, didn't have any views that, people found offensive, which is, quite common for those who want to rise politically with appointments, in Washington and throughout the country. But I saw what happened with regard to Trump's appointment of judges in the first
Right.
term, is that most of the judges he appointed, frankly, were either compromised or corrupt, in terms of their intellectual uh, integrity. And I wrote about it in my last book, It Takes a Counter-Revolution, Wake Up America, that you can get, I'll plug it, at freedomwatchusa.org and on Amazon and elsewhere, is that Trump didn't know who he was appointing. So this time, I've offered that we do a judicial advisory task force, kind of set something up like Elon Musk did with Vivek Ramaswamy outside to give Trump, the president, counsel on who he's appointing, because the people he rubber stamped to go on the bench were given to him by the Federalist Society or American Conservative Union, and they make money off of that. The money changes hands for this, and campaign contributions and whatever. So it's very important that we get good judges, particularly since Joe Biden today is high-fiving and celebrating the fact that his 238th judge has now been confirmed. I mean, this is a disaster. I'll get your comments on this. And Chuck Schumer, at least for the next few days, is still majority leader of the Senate. He's been bragging that it's the Biden judges that he had confirmed and other leftist judges that are going to stymie for a monkey wrench into Trump's agenda to make America great again. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that's the plan, and the plan is to do everything that they possibly can do, perhaps even starting a war with Iran in the final days of the administration. There was talk just recently. Axios, which is a pro-regime liberal rag, put out a story today or yesterday about some supposed meeting in the Situation Room a month ago with Jake Sullivan, where he presented to Biden. Now, I don't know if Biden was awake enough to hear it or to understand what he was being presented, but strategic options, bombing options of Iran's nuclear facilities in the last days of the administration. And in principle, the catalyst for this would be Iran moving its enrichment of uranium from 60% to 90%. And, I'm sitting there scratching my head and said, well, guys, they've been enriching uranium to 60% for the past 4 years and you haven't done anything. So why are you now worried about it now in the last couple of weeks of the administration? And I think the answer to that is all of a piece with what Biden is doing. They're selling off the border wall. Sending more arms to Ukraine. They're doing their very best with these missiles going into Russia to provoke Putin into some kind of extraordinary response. And it's funny. It's ironic for me as an American, as a patriotic American, to say this, but Vladimir Putin is a more responsible leader than Joe Biden is. Vladimir Putin responded to those American provocations with the missiles going into Russia. And those missiles, by the way, those attack of missiles, Larry, had to be programmed by Americans. They were set up by American soldiers. They were fired by American soldiers. All the telemetry was done by Americans physically present in Ukraine. Biden basically declared war on Russia without telling the American
Yeah.
Congress, without saying anything to NATO. and he basically declared war on Russia. And Putin, instead of attacking us, he responded by launching a new experimental medium-range ballistic missile with a hypersonic glide vehicle that hit a missile factory in Ukraine, which the Soviets had built. It was where they were building the SS-20s and others. Enormous Dnipropetrovsk missile factory. And he said, look, here's our hyperglide missile. We can hit you anywhere, and there's no defense for it. So be careful. That was Putin's response. Now, okay, that is the response of a superpower, of a major power who is trying to carefully gauge this game of escalation. Escalation is a very dangerous game. And Biden had kind of jumped the escalation forward. And Putin was saying, careful. Let's just be careful what we're doing, because I've got stuff that you haven't seen before that can do you tremendous damage. How far do you want to go with this? And it was the U.S. that backed off. So I think in these last days of the Biden administration, fraught with danger for us in the United States, for the American people. I mentioned the auctioning off of the border wall, but this going on with Ukraine. I'm afraid he may be tempted to launch strikes on Iran in a way which does not actually do damage to the Iranians, but gives the Iranian regime the excuse to do damage to us, and especially to do damage to President Trump when he comes in. Now, I think President Trump is going to be able to handle it, but it is so irresponsible. And this national security team that we have in place right now today under Biden is so irresponsible. They're capable of things that will do serious damage to America's national security. And I'm afraid for that.
Yeah, well, Biden has come out of his cocoon for the last few days. He's been under a lot of criticism of having quit silently.
Yeah.
Nobody's seen him, but now he's out there again, stumbling around.
They revived him from the coma, right?
Yeah, and now he's also poking Trump in the face, giving medals of God, whatever it is, to Liz Cheney and everybody else. I mean, it's almost a comedy if it wasn't so tragic. And we can just pray and thank God that we don't have Kamala Harris as our next president. I mean, she belongs in the National Zoo in the hyena section of the monkey house, frankly. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Pathetic.
Her laugh.
But the whole administration, Larry, has been of a piece. They've combined ineptitude with downright malevolence in the way that they've carried out national security policy. I mean, look at Alexandra Mayorkas allowing 15, 20 million illegals to come into this country. What was that? What's that all about?
Yeah.
I mean, why would you do that as an American?
Why would you put an idiot like that into a major job for Department of Homeland Security as secretary? I was walking through several months ago, I tell this story, a TSA at the airport. And, they have in LAX, I was at LAX at the time, these monitors up with Mayorkas, giving his message of hope. And I said to the TSA gal, I said, how can you stand watching him all day long? And she says, I try not to.
At least she was honest with you. Yeah.
Right. I mean, they know he's an idiot, right?
Yeah.
But these are the people that have been in charge of this country, and they drove it into the ground. It's unreal. So what do you think? What do you think Trump is likely to do with Iran, given that you're a super Iranian expert?
Yeah, well, I could tell you what I have proposed that he do. I wrote an extensive paper about this at the America First Policy Institute. You can actually find it online, so it's public information. Not widely read, I will admit, but it is public information. And I believe that the Iranian regime is at a crossroads, especially after their defeat in Syria and the defeat of Hezbollah and the near defeat of Hamas. All of their proxies have been defeated. And the Iranian people can see that. They can smell weakness in the air. And this is the Middle East, Larry. Remember, and it's where the strong horse leads the country. When the people can smell that the strong horse is no longer strong, but a weak filly lying down to die, then the people rise up. And I think we are very close to that happening. So I've suggested to the president that he help that process along. that he helped it along first with our broadcasting by having Voice of America actually broadcast voices of freedom into Iran instead of be the voice of the mullahs, which it has been for so many years. I've suggested we do the same thing with Radio Free Europe. And I bear a personal sense of guilt almost for that responsibility, because in 1995, I was along with helping Senator Alphonse D'Amato put forward this whole idea of setting up a Persian language radio at, we called it Radio Free Iran, Radio Azadi at the time, and it became Radio Farda, Radio Tomorrow, at Radio Free Europe. And that one also has been a voice of the mullahs and not the surrogate radio that we had intended it to be, right?
I know a lot about that, Ken, because I represented some Voice of America broadcasters, as you know. By the way, who did Trump recently appoint to VOA? It slipped.
Carrie Lake.
Carrie Lake. Okay, well, maybe that'll be helpful.
I think she will do a good job, and I think it's going to be hard for for many of the left-wing entrenched mandarins at VOA to oppose her, because she is a broadcast. She comes from a very strong broadcast background, so they can't say he's just parachuting in somebody with no experience, right? She is a broadcaster, and she knows the business. So I think she's going to do very well.
I'm only smiling because that place, excuse the French, is a shit show. Okay,
it really is.
I work closely with Tim Shamble, who's the union.
Oh, I know Tim very well.
Person, and I remember one time, because he was recommending me to other broadcasters to represent them, a French woman walks in and tells me that in her section, her supervisor would come in and pull his pants down, and it was kind of like a cultural thing.
Wow.
So I was thinking, because I was trying to do, Hollywood sitcoms at the time, I thought it would be a great sitcom. Voice of America with the different sections with all the cultures.
It is a sitcom in a way, yeah, right.
But it's a tragic sitcom, tragic comedy.
Yeah, very peculiar Washington D.C. sitcom.
Ranked the worst agency in government yearly, worst.
Yeah,
and
many
their employees terribly. They treat them terribly.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's true. No, I think she's going to do a good job. So that's one thing that the president could do is first of all work on our broadcasting, which means our public voice. There are many things that he can do behind the scenes. Public diplomacy. For example, instead of legitimizing the Iranian regime the way that they're legitimized today at the World Health Organization, at the United Nations, at UNESCO, at the Human Rights Council, we should get them banned from those organizations. We shouldn't allow Iranian leaders who have blood on their hands to come to the United Nations every year in September for the UN General Assembly. It's outrageous that we do that. Anybody who is on our terrorism list or is on the list of human rights violators should not be allowed to come to the United States of America.
Well, that may apply to, frankly, a lot of them, because they get their diplomatic visas and they're able to come in and they're spying on our country. I think we should just throw the UN out. I've said that a long time. Let it go to Geneva, send it to some other place.
No, I think it should go to either Abidjan or Lagos, and I'm willing as a U.S. taxpayer to pay the moving costs.
Okay. I think that's probably a good idea. That's good land over there on the Hudson River. Let's use it for something else. We can make a theme park.
Exactly.
There. But there's a lot going on.
So that's another thing. It's what we can do diplomatically, and then the really big idea in this piece at the America First Policy Center is that I'm suggesting that the president should appoint a special ambassador to the people of Iran, not to negotiate with the regime, because he's probably going to do that anyway, but a special ambassador to the people of Iran who will meet publicly and privately with opposition leaders, with opposition groups, perhaps to hold conferences in the United States, in Europe, and elsewhere with opposition leaders, to embolden them, to empower them, and to harness the United States government capabilities to make available tools of free speech. For example, apps that can help them organize demonstrations without being tracked by the regime, apps that allow them to get onto the internet when the regime tries to shut down the country, to take it dark, to make it go dark. The things that we know how to do, that the U.S. government knows how to do, we can help them with those things. We've done it in Ukraine. We can do it in Iran as well. But I would like to see a special ambassador to the people of Iran. It would send a message to the mullahs right away that they might think they can cut a deal with Donald Trump, but if it's not a really, really good deal and a good deal for America, which they don't want to do, they're going to have a deal
I don't,
served to them that they don't like.
I don't think they can cut a deal. And the question I pose to you is that what do you do because Iran is now reportedly just a few days away from having a nuclear weapon? 10. They have enough uranium if it's enriched to 90 for 10 bombs.
Right.
That's a very short fuse.
It
And
is.
they're not going to give that up. And even if they agreed to, it would never be verified in any substantial way given past history. So what do you do if you're President Trump and it looks like they're making a move to become nuclear? Although I believe they probably already have a weapon or two, but say they don't. What would you do if you were President Trump?
Well, Larry, we have a big problem, and the problem is the U.S. intelligence community has depended for many years now on technical intelligence, on signals intelligence, on satellites, on communications intercepts, and not on human sources. And so we do not have as a government, the United States and the USIC, the United States intelligence community does not have human sources in Iran. The Israelis do. The Israelis would have a better idea of what the Iranians are doing or about to do than the CIA does. And that's a real problem. So I'm not sure that we would detect anything that the Iranians were doing. Also, keep this in mind is that I don't think that they're going to do that final enrichment in one of their public facilities. So they've declared or been forced to declare a number of their enrichment plants to the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, right? And from time to time, inspectors get there. They haven't been going recently because the Iranians haven't let them in. But they have monitoring cameras, which work sometimes, which don't work sometimes. But the reason that we know that they are this close to the bomb is because of the IAEA. For once, there's actually a very good director general, a guy named Rafael Grossi, an Italian, who has been very proactive. He's been very tough with the Iranians. They haven't been happy with him. He's been trying to get the Biden people to pay attention. They won't. But he is the one who has warned that they have enough enriched uranium today that if they just spin the centrifuges a little bit more, from that 60 to 90%, which is really just a very small amount in terms of the enrichment cycle, they can have enough for 10 weapons in something like 2 weeks. It's
Well, that's the point. And that's why, from my perspective, I think you have a really good idea. The question is, would not it have been more effective through no fault of your suggestion nor Trump if it had been done, 4 years ago or 2 years ago? But now we're up against the wall and you can't give them the time to do that because if they feel like their own people are about ready to move on them, they'll be like desperate, wounded animals.
Larry, that's okay. Revolutions happen very quickly. Look what happened in Romania with Ceausescu. He was on the top of his game one day, and with 3 weeks later, he was hanging along with his wife from a cord in a little town north of his capital. The Berlin Wall. How long did it take the Berlin Wall to come down?
Mussolini.
Not long. Mussolini. So revolutions can happen very, very quickly. And the one thing that you know about it is that the regime will not know. They will not see the revolution coming. When it happens, they won't see it until it's too late. So I'm not actually worried about that. I'm not worried about the timetable. I am worried about us having a policy in place that can get that timetable going.
Understood. But if we did decide to take out the nuclear facilities, given the fact that Israel has taken out a lot of the air defenses and other defenses involved, now would be the time to do it.
Well,
Don't
I
you
think it
think?
would certainly be, just logistically much easier of an operation. The Israelis could not do it alone. They do not have the deep penetration bombs that we have. So either we would have to give them access to those weapons, or there would have to be some kind of joint strike by the U.S. and Israel. There are quite a number of sites to hit. There's probably 2 dozen of them or thereabouts that are important sites. And there's also, as Donald Rumsfeld liked to say, there's the unknown unknowns. So we don't know what we don't know. But we know that we don't know certain things. So we know that we don't know where all of it is. We
Well,
know
it would
that.
be nice. It would be nice if the Israelis could infiltrate whatever palace the supreme leader lives in
Yeah.
and maybe, plant something under his bed or his cell phone or whatever the case may be. That might trigger if they took this guy out. You
Well,
know,
they
it would be
see
a signal to the people that, the path is clear.
that. Well,
You think we should do something like that?
that's an interesting notion, Larry. Uh, how should I say? There are certain times of year when the leader gets together with all of his sub leaders and the sub leaders. There are about 350 of them, and they all meet in the same place, and they are physically in that location several times a year. We know the dates when they do this. The Israelis know the dates when they do this. Wouldn't it be just terrible if something happened on one of those days of the year, one of those meetings that nobody thinks about, and all of a sudden there's 350 top mullahs who are no longer top mullahs, at least not in this world.
Well, they can fight for the leadership, like they did with the head of Hamas when they basically put something under his
Amazing,
bed.
pretty amazing operation. I mean, the Israelis have shown when it comes to human intelligence, they are second to none. They are the best of the best. We don't hold a candle to Mossad in our ability to do overseas operations. We used to, but not these days.
Now, our CIA has been run by the equivalent of Inspector Clouseau, for many years. Evil, evil version of Inspector Clouseau.
Yeah,
Not,
with a deputy
not funny.
yeah, with a deputy who's really dedicated to DEI, the making diversity quilts.
Diversity, equity, inclusion, and people like John Brennan who were bowing down and doing prayer on Muslim prayer rugs
Right,
as the CIA director. It's
right.
it's unreal,
It's
unreal.
pretty outrageous, and it demoralizes people. And you've had a lot of good people who joined the agency after 9/11. I've interviewed a number of them over the years, and who left within 8 years, within 10 years, because they were depressed by that DEI mentality. They were not being promoted because of their skills. People were being promoted because of their diversity, their gender, their politics.
Yeah, assuming one could figure out what their gender is, of course, and that was another one. Now, it's been a freak show for the last 4 years. Fortunately, we're back to hopeful normalcy. I just pray for the president that he's safe. I believe that there are probably going to be other attempts, God forbid,
Yeah.
on his life. But we do have Vance behind him. They may try to get them both at the same time. And of course, the Iranians were reportedly behind attempts to kill President Trump. And I don't
There's a
doubt it.
public attempt. There's one very public attempt, exactly, that the FBI even exposed, and they've indicted people. But that was not one of the two known assassination attempts that led to physical attacks on the president. This is yet another, a third attack that never
And
took
I
place.
believe that the Biden administration or regime, whatever you want to call it, having knowledge of that, intentionally did not give President Trump adequate security, hoping that the Iranians or some other entity that wanted to take him out would do the job for them. I don't believe that what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, or even at Trump's golf course in Palm Beach was simply the result of negligence. I believe that the lack of adequate security was intended by the Biden administration to have someone else do the dirty deed and to kill Trump because they knew at the time that they were likely to lose the election. I do
God
believe.
forbid. But I think there's an awful lot of evidence that that's the case. Trump came out, I think, after the attempt on the golf course and said that they had been asking for additional security and had been refused. And in Butler, Pennsylvania, I think it was Jill Biden who was doing an event with 15 people elsewhere in the state. And so they diverted Secret Service personnel to her
Yeah,
non-event and did not even have radios where they could communicate with the local police at Butler. Hmm.
yeah. Well, it was interesting at the time. Elon Trump, I think, had a tweet which
No,
suggested
not yet Elon Trump. He's not yet Elon Trump. It's still
I
Elon
mean,
Musk.
Elon Musk, Freudian.
Yeah, exactly.
I think you said, why would anyone bother with Joe Biden? He got himself in trouble
Right, right.
for that. He had to retract it. But in fact, nobody wishes anybody any physical harm, that's for sure.
No,
But and thank
absolutely.
you for coming on. You're a tremendous scholar and good friend, and you give us a lot of insight into what's going on, frankly, that we don't get, watching Fox News or any place else. They keep bringing the same analysts on all the time.
Right. True.
I think Fox has done a lot of good in the last 4 years. I got to give them credit, although I've never been, a fan. But you don't get the in-depth reporting that Ken Timmerman gives you. So I urge you to get his book, The Iran House, and Maybe you'll write the next one, the clown house about the Biden administration.
Well, I'd like to. I would like the sequel to the Iran House to be how we succeeded in overthrowing a miserable regime in Tehran and helping the Iranian people to establish freedom in their country and take their country back.
Right. Well, and final thought before we sign off, isn't it ironic that recently Jimmy Carter died? And of course, I actually, when I was a young lawyer to be at Emory, we all got wrapped up in the fact that Carter was the governor of Georgia and this and that, and I actually volunteered to work on his campaign. Big mistake, I might add, in retrospect. But I mean, here's a guy that created the situation in Iran.
Right.
And I mean, to be nice to the guy, in the last few days, because he did some good stuff after he was president. He also, unfortunately, hated Israel and was not very productive.
He was a tremendous anti-Semite,
Yeah.
and it's and it's the sad thing about it, he wasn't alone. It's these people who believe the so-called Christians who believe in replacement theology, and they believe that that Christians have been given the mandate by God to take over as the chosen people from the Jewish people. It is so wrong. It is so unbiblical, and it is so antithetical to what I think most of us believe as Christianity to be. And yet Carter believed that. He believed that. And because of that, he dedicated most of his life after leaving the office to slamming Israel, slandering Israel, and promoting the rights of the so-called Palestinian people over the
The,
right to choose to live in their historical homeland.
the irony is he didn't do any favors to Saudi Arabia or the Gulf states because
Mhm.
if they had their druthers,
Right.
they'd be joining Israel to take out the nuclear reactor in Iran. And they are probably, in many ways, uh, Saudi Arabia has been a better ally of Israel than the Biden regime has been to Israel in many ways, under the table, without
Yeah.
saying anything about it. So the good news is that under Trump, I believe that Saudi Arabia and the Arab states will play a very constructive role in trying to manage what's going on, particularly after Gaza,
Well,
after
I think that's right. And
yeah.
and remember one of the first things that Biden did when he came in January of 2021 was to insult the Saudis right away. He released this pathetic 3-page CIA analysis, which said that the crown prince is probably in charge of the security service, and they were most likely the ones who were involved in murdering this dissident, the Saudi dissident journalist who sometimes wrote for the Washington Post. It was actually being paid for by their enemy, the Qataris. But he most likely was the one who was, and then he went and tarred Mohammed bin Salman and called him a murderer and broke off relations, stopped U.S. arms deals to Saudi Arabia, arms deliveries to Saudi Arabia in April of 2021. And so Mohammed bin Salman just went on and said, okay, well, now they're going to treat us with an enemy. Guess where I'm going? Russia. He went and worked
Well,
with
first
Russia.
of all, I don't believe that MBS, Mohammed bin Salman himself was behind what happened to Khashoggi, but I did joke about it. I probably shouldn't say this, but I said it's too bad he didn't get the rest of the Washington Post. But I don't believe he did it.
Yeah.
And you know, but now Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, has become a great friend of President Trump for
Right.
his own self-preservation. But that is a vile bunch of people over at the
It
Washington Post.
sure is.
I don't
It
mean that
sure is.
anybody should be hurt, and that's no aspersion
And
towards.
those op-eds that he wrote, we know now. I mean, there's a Washington Post, I'm sorry, a New York Times writer who did a book on Mohammed bin Salman about 2 years ago. I forget the guy's name. It was actually a pretty good book, but he acknowledged that those op-eds were all written by American lobbyists working for the government of Qatar to smear the Saudis and to smear Israel and to
Oh, they're
promote
competitors. They're
and to,
competitors.
and to smear and to promote the
Yeah.
Muslim
In
Brotherhood.
fact, the prince is very enlightened. He's turning that nation into the 20th century. I've been there. I went there last year for a live golf tournament. I represent a golfer who plays on live,
Right.
Patrick Reed. He's building huge cities. He's
Mm.
a lot of investment. He's turned Saudi Arabia into a tourist attraction. And I went to King Abdullah Economic City. You would think you were in Palm Beach.
Mm.
You could get a condo there, and it's
Mm.
beautiful in the Red Sea. So he's been very enlightened, and have universities there and stuff like that. So why do you want to trash what may be our third best ally in this world, frankly, Saudi
Well,
Arabia?
Biden wanted to trash him because he was about to sign the Abraham Accords with Israel, and that would have been the final cherry on the cake of the success of Donald Trump as the 45th president of the United States, and Biden didn't want that to happen.
Yeah. Well, Biden had to get down on his knees later and kiss the prince's ring, okay, because he didn't want to open up energy exploration, investment, and production in the United States. So he became more dependent on Saudi oil and Venezuelan oil and went over there and begged to no avail. I believe that the Saudis influenced the election. I'm glad they did by not increasing production before the election, keeping the price of oil high. Okay, they didn't want him in there. They hate Biden. You know, they want him gone. I'm sure they're very
Well,
happy
and
today.
I think Americans saw that in January of 2021 when Trump left office, a gallon of regular was $1.87, and it doubled during Biden's term of office. Doubled. The price of gasoline doubled in the United States. How outrageous is that? Without an oil crisis.
Right. Well, we have a lot of hope today. Let us pray, Ken.
We do. Mm,
Let us pray. But we all do have this positive feeling, and it's, me a long time coming because I've seen how corrupt government is, and you know my history.
I do.
Is that everything I said was going to happen? If I do say so myself, happened. Okay, we reached the absolute bottom in terms of corruption,
Mm,
and the American people finally saw that. And frankly, it surprised me that they saw it to the
mm,
extent that they did, and that's a very positive sign. Even the young people in this country
yeah.
now understand, and the fact that Trump is swashbuckling and makes remarks off the cuff, that kind of are offensive from time to time. The kids like that, right?
Absolutely. It's and I get
He's
it.
one of them.
Yeah, exactly. I like it too. I mean,
Right, right.
I think he's tremendously entertaining as well as being amazingly smart and the quickest study of any person I've ever met. Just amazing how fast he gets stuff.
He's smart, and also the fact, I was thinking in the beginning when he ran against Kamala Harris,
Mm,
why doesn't he call her Harris? But he was calling her Kamala because he was taking her down to street level. He wasn't dignifying who she was.
yeah.
He's very smart. He thinks, down the line, and certainly she proved to be a complete embarrassment to the Democrat Party.
Well, Donald Trump is a strategic thinker, and everybody, the what do they say? The history is lined with the graves of politicians who underestimated Donald Trump.
Right.
Yeah, he's a strategic
But,
thinker. It's
but our
out
but our
thought.
secret weapon was Doug Imhoff. I think he was the greatest pick. Husband of Kamala Harris, who impregnated the nanny and then forced her to get an abortion. This is the guy that was going to help lead this revolution of morality by the Democrats. So anyway, I guess it's part of DEI. You have equal rights if you're a nanny. You can get impregnated by whatever. I got to do stand-up comedy. I can't resist.
I am
I can't
so glad.
resist doing this anymore, Ken.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much
I'm
comedy
so
here.
glad we're beyond this. This is behind us, Larry. We are headed into one of the greatest years of America's history. I think 2025 is going to be a great year. Things are going to change dramatically. I was very pleased to see that the House finally was able to elect a speaker on the first round, although it was a long first round, but they did elect him. And I'm one of those guys. Look, I've lived in European parliamentary democracies. A lot of Americans don't understand what is a parliamentary democracy. You vote by your party. We like to think we're individualists. I get that. And I get this. There's 435 members of the U.S. Congress. I get that. They all think that they're prima donnas, that they're kings. But if you want to get anything done, you better vote as a party, decide what you want as a party, and
Yeah.
vote as a party. Because if you don't, the other party's going to kill you.
No,
They're
but I think,
going to
Ken,
slaughter you.
I'll be
Like,
brief here and we'll sign off after that. But I was watching Fox this morning and I was watching Karl Rove, who I cannot stand. Okay. I cannot stand. He's the flip side of James Carville. Okay. And I've tangled with him in the past at Judicial Watch, and I ran for the US Senate in Florida. And, he was against my winning because I'm not part of the establishment, not part of the Rhino. He's never liked Trump. He frankly hates Trump. And he comes on and he starts trashing these Republicans. They're destroying the party that, they didn't vote in unison the first time. It was clear what these others were doing. They just simply wanted to get some commitment out of Speaker Johnson. They weren't going to vote against him. And sure enough, they caved in short order. I think what they did was good. And
well, and the way that they did it was good because they held open the vote. So they didn't. We did not see the same embarrassment that we saw with Kevin McCarthy when it went on for several days, and
yeah,
So they held open the vote. Look, my friend Andy Harris from Maryland. Andy and I were good friends. I've known him very, very well. He campaigned for me. I can't when I ran for U.S. Congress in Maryland in 2012, and I campaigned for him. Andy did not answer the first round of the vote. And then at the end, they were calling to see those who had not yet cast their votes, and they called his name. And then he, at the end, said, "Okay, Johnson," and
Yeah, it's
he walked
smart.
off.
They were making a point.
And he made his point. He made his point without tearing down the house. And I think
Exactly.
that's the way to do it. That is a parliamentary democracy. That's the way that you do it. And I think Speaker Johnson got the point, and I hope that a lot of Americans got the point as well. That's the way to do it.
I agree. Well, it's great having you. I'll have you on again. I hope to see you soon.
Yep.
You live in Florida now. You're a fellow Floridian. God bless you. Very
Larry,
smart move.
we left Maryland 6 years ago and not looked back once.
Yeah, no, I want to help Trump. I want to help him from outside of the administration. I don't think I could stand living in Washington, D.C. again. It's a terrible place.
Amen.
And I've said we ought to take the Capitol. You know, you participated in our Third Continental Congress. We had to take the Capitol and put it somewhere else. Put the UN and wherever you want to put it. And let's put Washington, D.C. in some Western or Southern state and get it the heck out of the District of Columbia, frankly.
Well, there you go.
And we can turn DC into Disneyland, right? So,
Right. Well, maybe we can swap Orlando for DC, right?
okay, we'll do that. Anyway, great to see you. If people want to go get your book, where can they get it?
KenTimmerman.com, KenTimmerman.com, or just look up my name anywhere on the internet or at Amazon. You'll find my books. The last one, the recent one, is The Iran House.
Great. And please go to freedomwatchusa.org. We are your real Justice Department. Contribute with tax-deductible contributions. We need your help. We are your real Justice Department. God bless you. God bless America. Stay safe, Ken, you and your family. And we look forward to a great new year.
Amen to that.
Thanks for being on, brother.
Thank you, Larry. We're going to make America great.
We will. Take care.
Again.